All right.
Good afternoon and welcome to the final session today, where we are discussing purpose and values, the foundation of family business success, with Andrew Keyt, who is a long-standing family business consultant and friend of mine who I've known for a number of years now. Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you to do a little brief introduction and then to set the scene, and we'll get into the session. Anyone that's got any questions, if they want to post them to the chat box, I will take those at the relevant times and post them to Andrew, and we'll have a discussion around the content towards the end. So Andrew, I'm really interested. We've done a lot of conversations this week about purpose and values. We know it's integral to success, so we're really interested in your take on the subject this afternoon. So the floor's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Just delighted to be here today and to talk to you about a topic that I'm super passionate about. And I'll tell you a little bit about why by starting by telling you a little bit about my story. So this is the Johnston Farm in Piqua, Ohio, which is where my dad grew up. My dad grew up in this house. This is where he reportedly grew up, going 5 miles to school uphill both ways, slopping the pigs at 4 in the morning, you know, all of those dramatic stories that he had about his growing up. But the important part of the story kind of happens when I was 22 and I was just out of college. And unfortunately, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer. And so my older brother and I were in a pattern of going up to visit him in the suburbs as he was ill. And one night he asked me to stay at the hospital, and he said he was going to pass all the ownership in our family business to me and not split it between me and my brothers. And my reaction was, we have a family business? Because I grew up in Chicago, and my father had spent his life insulating us from, his relationship with his cousins. He had problematic relationships with his cousins, and he, I guess, didn't want to expose us to that. But my father then, when he was 52 and on his deathbed, tells me he's going to pass the ownership to me and not split it between me and my brothers. He wanted to keep decision-making centralized, but he also said to me, you should distribute the income to your brothers equally. So kind of a confusing message to get on your father's deathbed. And unfortunately, he did pass away after I left the hospital that night. So I woke up the next day, a newly minted family business owner, having to try to figure out what to do here. And the reality was my dad's family was so fragmented. There were no common values. There were people spread all across the country. There had been no effort to keep people connected. So I'm trying to figure out how to, at the age of 22, interact with my dad's cousins who are in their late 50s, 60s, and some in their 70s about what do we do with this property. And so it's part of the reason I'm really passionate about this topic and really passionate about family businesses, is because I felt really alone, and I never wanted any other family business to have that feeling of being alone in those situations. So that's why I've been working with family businesses for almost 30 years now. So the reality is, in a family business, we're born into a story that's already being told about our parents, our grandparents. And to illustrate this, I'll tell you about a guy named Lance Crane. So Lance, when he took over his family business, was a 6th generation member. His family business goes back to the American Revolution. So Lance's 7 times great grandfather made the paper that used to print the currency to pay the Continental Army in the American Revolution. So fast forward to when Lance is taking over as the successor or heir apparent in the early 90s, their core products were thermal fax paper, stock certificate paper, fine stationery, blueprint paper, all products in dying markets, right? And then their other product was the paper that the US government uses to print their currency. So Lance was kind of given one of the traditional challenges of family business, which is what do we need to hold on to and nurture and protect about our family business that makes it special? And what do we need to change in order to survive and grow? And what really was really helpful to Lance was having a strong sense of values and purpose that allowed him to keep both the family and non-family team committed to a future together. And they transformed Crane and Company from a paper manufacturing company to a security features company. So now Crane and Company creates all of these security features that you see in currencies across the world. So, but it was the values and the sense of purpose that guided Lance in that process. So today we're going to talk about purpose and values and how they help sustain family businesses. We're going to talk about what is our why, what do we believe, where are we going? This is all that mission and purpose and our values and our vision. We're going to talk about each of these, and we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions a little bit at the end. But I want to share with you some research. One of the things that's a core belief of myself and our firm is really trying to marry research and practice. So my friend Joe Astrachan likes to say, if you were to compare the science in the field of family business to the field of medicine, we're still in the stage of bloodletting, right? So we're still very early in our stages of understanding family business. But what I'm going to share with you here is research on families that had survived for over 250 years. And it really talks about what was it that enabled these family businesses to survive for so long. And what it came down to was ownership, unity, and family cohesion were what kept the family together. And purpose and values are intricately connected to this issue. When the family is unified and cohesive about where we're going, we can change what business we're in. We can move into different markets. We can meet the challenges that the market is facing. If we aren't unified as a family, we're usually spending so much time on internal family squabbles that we're missing the changes in the environment around us, the strategic challenges that we need to face if we're going to survive as a family business. You know, the most basic decision we make as family business owners is, why do we want to be in business together, and what businesses do we want to be in? And having alignment and connection and cohesion are super important in that. You know, I like to say that when you start a business, you get to choose your business partners. When you are in a family business, you've inherited your business partners. So every generation has to decide, why do we want to do this together? So cohesion's a really nice flowery word, but what does it actually mean? It means a feeling of unity that gives us a common sense of purpose and leads us to joint action. So purpose and values are core to building cohesion. If we're clear about our purpose, if we're clear about our values, that gives us a greater sense of unity and connection to each other. It gives us that common sense of purpose. We have a project that we're working on together, and we're moving to action on that. And I think that's a critical piece in this, that it's not just about putting these things on paper, it's about living them and breathing them every day. And actually, a family that I work with that's a fourth generation family, they have 7 core values, and they have a ceremony at the end of every year. And you can't self-nominate, you can only be nominated by others, but they honor the people in each of their 7 values, somebody who's lived that value. And you nominate somebody by telling the story of how they lived that value, but putting that value into action. So not only do they get to honor 7 people every year through the nomination process, they get the stories of how people are living the values every day. And then that becomes a tool that they can share with everybody else in the family and the system to reinforce those values and say what it means to live those values on a day-to-day basis. But the interesting thing about this research was that it showed that there are 4 main elements to the cohesion in a family. There's business financial cohesion, family financial cohesion, family emotional, and business emotional. So I think we can all understand that in order to get to 250 years, you have to have some business financial success. So business financial cohesion is cohesion that comes from having a successful business and the financial rewards that come from it. Family financial is cohesion that comes from using the financial resources of the family to help each other. That may be helping buy your first house or helping with children's education. Any number of the things that we use family financial resources to help each other grow and develop. In fact, one of the families I work with says one of their core purposes is to help each family member find their sweet spot. And they put their financial resources behind that. And the sweet spots that overlap between what the family member is good at, what they're passionate about, and what the world needs. And they focus many of their financial resources towards that, and that builds cohesion. But what I thought was the most interesting part of this research was that the financial variables were necessary but not sufficient to survive for 250 years. So if there are any philosophy majors here, this takes me back to my first year college introduction to logic class. But necessary but not sufficient means you need financial success to survive, but it's not all that you need. There's an old Peter Drucker quote that profits are like air. It's necessary for living, it's not a reason to live. And so when we're talking about purpose and values, those are our reason to live. And what this research showed was that the families that were successful in making it 250 years really cultivated a sense of family emotional cohesion and business emotional cohesion. Family emotional cohesion is a sense of connection to each other, a sense of caring for each other, and nurturing that across generations. Now, that's a complex equation. You know, it's easier in some respects with a smaller group of people. And it will look different if you have 50, 60, 70 family members. The type of attachments you have and how you nurture them are going to look differently. But you need to have a strategy and an approach to building family emotional cohesion. And business emotional cohesion is a sense of pride in what we're doing together, the sense of being a part of a common project. And our values, our sense of purpose, are core to building both family emotional and business emotional cohesion. They are critical. And I have to credit my colleague, Torsten Pieper, Dr. Torsten Pieper, who was the originator of this research, and Joe Astrachan helped bring this model forward. So, but I think it's really important to understand that financial success alone is not what will get us through the generations, that we have to nurture that ownership unity and family cohesion, and we need to build a sense of pride in the common project that we're endeavoring to take on together. And our purpose and our values are very much a part of that. Building sustainable cohesion, we need both formal structures of boards of directors, shareholders agreements, and family councils, because peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding, right? So the board of directors, shareholders agreements, and family councils may not be all that we need. We also need communication and regular exchange. The structures can facilitate that, but at the end of the day, we each have a choice of how we show up in every conversation, and we have to live those behaviors on a day-to-day basis. So Trusted Family is a great resource in terms of fostering that family communication and regular exchange. But we also need informal structures. We need to be building trust every day with each behavior. Each interaction we have with each other is an opportunity to build trust, an opportunity to build cohesion. And I like to say that trust is built very, very slowly over time and lost very quickly by mistakes, right? So, and that's not to say we don't make mistakes, but when we make mistakes, we have to be accountable to them, and we need to work to repair. And it's more important how we move to repair than that we make a mistake. So we need these informal structures of building trust, shared values, stewardship mentality. So I love this this ad. You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation, right? This sense of I'm taking care of something for something bigger than myself. I also like to say when we're talking about me rather than we in a family business, that's when we're in trouble. So we also have to manage and understand that there's going to be ambiguity in all of this, right? This is not something where you can put everything into a spreadsheet and add up the numbers and say, well, our trust is at an 89.5, right? We have to be able to sit with the ambiguity, work through things, and especially when we're changing something, we have to realize that any change can look like a failure in the middle, right? So we have to have patience and sit with that ambiguity. And we have to train the next generation. And our purpose and our values are critical to doing all of these things. We want our purpose and our values to be the foundation of all of these activities. So there's a great author named Jay Hughes who says, to successfully preserve wealth, a family must form a social compact amongst its members, reflecting its shared values, and each successive generation must reaffirm and readopt that social compact. So when we create this sense of purpose and this sense of values, each generation has to recommit to them. And sometimes that means that there might be some shifts. So I'll give you an example of a evangelical Christian family that was moving from the second generation to the third generation. So the second generation was deeply evangelical from the Midwest of the U.S. And their service award within the company is Christ on a Cross. So it was very front and center in everything that they did. Now, the third generation, you went from 4 in the second generation to 8 to when they got married to 16 in the third generation. And so there's a lot more diversity in that third generation. So that third generation had to wrestle with what about being an evangelical Christian do we still align with, and how does that look in our generation when we've married people who didn't necessarily come from that same tradition. And the reality was they held on to most of what that meant, but they actually asked the question of what's different in our generation, and how do we adapt this sense of purpose and our sense of values and our sense of vision for our generation. So these have to be living documents, and every generation has to commit to this. If you come together with a mission and it's grounded with love and a sense of community, you can make the impossible possible. So I love this quote just because it captures the power of developing and cultivating this sense of purpose. I think in a family business, especially in the early days, we're so connected to the getting stuff done that and talking about this sense of mission and purpose seems superfluous. It seems like window dressing, but when we cultivate it and commit to it in a significant way, it actually is incredibly powerful and can allow us to do things that other companies can't. So I'll give you the example. Many of you may know the company SC Johnson. They took fluorocarbons out of their aerosol cans far before anybody else in their market. They did it because they said it was the right thing to do for the environment and for their community. And I think it was another 10 or 15 years till their competitors took fluorocarbons out of their cans. But they said, this is the right thing to do, so we're going to do it. And it's really been an important part of who they are as an organization. So our mission, our purpose statement should be the concise statement for our organization, and it's our reason for being. It's our why. If anybody wants to watch a great little video, just look up Simon Sinek and what is your why? It's a great capturing of what a purpose statement is about, but it articulates the reasons that we want to keep the family connected. Why do we want to be in business together? It's a true north to guide us. It's that old thing. if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But we want to make sure that everybody in the family is aligned with why do we want to be in business together and where do we want to go. So a lot of people would think that somebody like me wouldn't want to talk about selling the family business. And I say that's a healthy discussion to get into at different times, because if you've talked about that, you have a greater sense of why you're in business together. If we avoid that conversation, then we have less of a sense of why we're in business together. If, I've seen families that have said, they've had somebody come to them and offer just a ridiculous multiple. And they said, it would be irresponsible for us not to take this money. And then they've sold their family business and started something new together. But it's because they were unified as a family that they said, this is the right business decision. We can still be in business together, but it's going to look different, right? We're going to grow and adapt, and we're going to use not just our financial capital, but our social capital as a family to move forward and get into new businesses. So, but it takes time to nurture this sense of purpose and get on the same page. And you can't rush through this conversation. I actually had a bank come to me at one point. They wanted my advice to help them create a software program where different family members would just answer a questionnaire, and then the computer would spin out a mission statement. I said, you don't understand a mission statement if you're trying to do that, right? Because while the end statement is super important, it's the process we use to create it and the alignment that comes from it that's really, really important to the equation. So the questions we would ask in the why conversation: what does the business bring to the family aside from just money? What does this business mean to us? A lot of times families, when they sell their businesses, they truly underestimate everything that the business brought to their family, that sense of connection, that sense of purpose. And it's actually something that is a challenge for many family offices that don't have operating businesses, is that they don't have a centralizing force or sense of purpose around keeping a business alive. They have to do more work to create a clearer sense of purpose for the family office. But also asking the question, what does a family bring to the business? What does the business mean to the community? What does the business bring to its people? And what makes our family different? Why are we different than anybody else? These are all things that help us really get to our core sense of purpose. So I won't read through all of this, but you'll get access to these slides. This is just a sample of a mission statement that one family put together. And you can take a look at this in your own time and think about how it might relate to your family. So values: it's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are, right? So a family that I worked with, really, really well known for their people processes. They have a summer camp for kids where they take their employees' kids to this free summer camp. They really take care of their people with education and support. And they often have multiple family members from the same family working for them across generations. And so that was the case when they found out that one of their employees, one of their core values is honesty and integrity. And they found out that one of their employees had been taking taking a piece of pie every day from the cafeteria and not paying for it. They were, when they were wrestling with this decision about what to do about it, because he was a good employee, had been with them for 15 years, and also had other family members working for the company for extended periods of time. They reached the conclusion that they had to fire this person because it was just not in accordance with their values. And there was some fear that the rest of the family of this individual would revolt. But what actually happened was that the family members came to them and said, "Thank you for doing that. This family member really embarrassed us by not living up to the values. We believe in these values." So your values will make it clear who should be on the bus and who shouldn't be on the bus. I've also done some research on non-family CEOs. And what we found is that in order for a non-family CEO to be effective, they really have to have strong values alignment. And that's critical. So our value statement provides a clear statement of the how. How do we want to pursue our goals and objectives? What are the values we want to guide our actions and behaviors? And all of this shapes our culture, our decision-making, and gives a sense of meaning to our actions. And so if we haven't kind of defined these, it's can be the wild, wild west in terms of people's behaviors. So we want to focus on values rather than value, right? So the value comes when we operate with integrity. And this is the classic: private equity operates by value. Family businesses operate by values. So value is only looking at the bottom line, singular focus on money, and money being the most important motivation. But values, if we want to build an enduring organization, an organization that is successful over time, we want values, and we want our values to be the basis for our goals, the basis for our culture, the opportunity to find meaning in what we're doing and focusing on the long term. I love this comment. I was speaking at a conference in San Diego a few years ago, and one of the business owners stood up and said, "I think quarter to quarter. I think in quarters of 25 years," right? So, but that long-term mentality is super important. So values alignment is challenging because conflict immediately comes up when clear rules, structures, and value systems are missing. So in highly conflictual environments, there's often a lack of a strong value system. So this is a quote from the research that Torsten did. And conflict immediately comes up when clear rules, structures, and value systems are missing. And we think that we have all of these. This means that as a family, we grow up with a clear set of rules. There are clear-cut issues that we absorb with mother's milk, right? So that we cultivate that sense of values from over a very long time. And you could argue that the most important time in the life of the next generation of the family business is when we're parenting them when they're young, because that's when they learn rules, responsibility. That's when they need consistency and sets them up for success in the future. So clear rules, structures, and values, we want them internalized early on, shared by all family members, right? So we don't have to agree on everything, right? But we do need to have a common set of values that we believe in. We want to harmonize those preferences and use them to drive the choices that we make, and reduce ambiguity. In ambiguity, it kind of invites more conflicts. That's not to say we will not have conflict, right? We will have conflict in the creation of our values. We will have conflict when we're talking about purpose. It's not about always agreeing, but it's having a common set of values that guide us through those conflicts and decisions. So obviously, this is one, I love this. It's a little bit controversial, but obviously we cannot influence the choice of spouses, but the strength of one's value system, or the conviction about that value system, of course, affects the choice. And insofar, I think it reflects how much a family member is convinced of this value system and how much they have internalized it, right? So there's a provocative article that somebody put out there at one point that was called "In-laws, team member or terrorist," right? This quote is just saying that if we have strong values, we're going to bring people into the system that share those values, and not people who might be not aligned with those values. So this is a sample value statement. Again, you'll be able to have an example of this in the slides when you read them, but it's just an opportunity for the family to make it clear what your values are, And what's really important is that we put these values to work. By articulating our values, we can start to say, what are the examples we have of people living these values? And how can we use these values to define our goals and how we're going to pursue our goals? And how are we going to share these values with our constituencies? So we want our employees to understand our values at a deep level. And we want to have conversations with our employees about what it means to look at these values, what it means to live these values. So I always encourage families, whenever they feel stuck in a decision, to go back to their value statement and say, well, how would our values apply to this? And if our employees know that, then we don't have to have necessarily pages and pages of policies and procedures. We can use the values to guide our behaviors rather than bureaucracy. And we want to reward the values and punish the lack of values, right? So we want to reinforce that in how we manage our businesses. So last but not least, vision. If you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you, right? So the vision is, where do we want to go? Is it compelling? And our vision statement should articulate our desired future state and communicate to our stakeholders where we're going. And hopefully, if we're managing well, communicating to each employee what their role is in helping us achieve that vision, so that somebody who's packing boxes in the warehouse understands how important their role is into achieving the vision that we're having. But we also want that vision to encompass, what do we want our family relationships to look like? So I worked with a family that is a very meticulous family. And what they did was they said, okay, we're about 36 family members right now. They had 12 kids in the second generation, so good Catholic family. And so they had 36 total when they were doing this project. And they looked at, what are the age, the life expectancies, where are people in the lifespan, and they did a calculation of how many family members we were going to have in 20 years. And they said, we're going to go from 36 to probably somewhere between 100 and 150 family members in the course of 2 decades. So they started saying, what do we need to do to keep our family relationships strong for when we're 100 family members? And how are we going to prepare that next generation? What do we want our family's relationship to the business to look like? And our vision statement should have a sense of inspiration that gives us a sense of energy and momentum. And we want our goals to be aligned to provide direction, discipline, the ability to resolve conflicts, and a sense of inspiration to our people. So all of that's to say that our sense of purpose and meaning are critical to resilience in long-standing families. So this is research that looks at what makes families resilient. So this is for all families, not just family businesses. But if you look at them, values and purpose are at the foundation of our belief systems. They help us make meaning of a crisis and challenge. You know, a lot of family businesses survived the pandemic because somebody stood up and said, not on my watch, right? Because this means more to me than just money. I'm going to make this survive. That sense of positive values and purpose give us a sense of hope, a sense of being a part of something bigger than ourselves, and helps us with communication and problem solving. So all of that, I will just end by saying, this is important and valuable work. It may not seem urgent, but it is extremely important, especially if we have aspirations to sustain our family businesses for generations to come. So this should be a regular part of the conversation. And we need to do the hard work on the front end to define that sense of mission, that sense of values, and create a common vision. So that's all I have from the presentation. And I think we have some opportunity for questions.
Yeah, Andrew, that was fantastic. And it really encapsulates, I guess, what we've been talking about all week in terms of underlying purpose and values that help successful family firms last for generations. I love the fact that you started the story by saying that actually people are being born into a story that's already been told. So I guess my first question is, how important is it that that story is captured by families to help perpetuate the value piece later on, especially I guess as you go from probably more second to third to fourth generation than the founder to the second generation. So how important is that story?
The story is very important, but also can be a challenge, right? Because sometimes the stories we tell are not, sometimes this is the title of the book, Myths and Mortals, right? Sometimes there's a mythology that gets input into the stories. And if we only tell the stories of our successes and never our failures, then success becomes magical, right? So the stories that we often tell are about the wild successes and the magical gut instinct that the founder has or the generations before had. But how did they develop that gut feeling? They did that through failing, through working through challenges. So we also want to tell the stories of challenge and overcoming things, because as the more and more successful we become as a family, it actually removes some of the common struggles that founder's generation actually had to go through. I mean, certainly there are struggles that every generation faces that are unique, but when we become part of a family of wealth, a lot of the natural obstacles that help people build the muscle of self-confidence and self-belief are removed. And so we have to be intentional in the parenting of the next generation to make sure that they have opportunities to struggle, to fail, to work through things. So the stories are very important. So understanding the truth of the stories, and then understanding the stories because they are a part of our narrative. And we want them to reinforce our values, to reinforce our purpose. So being cognizant of all of that.
I think as the generations go through, then obviously what your ancestors and your forefathers, and I guess forefathers, foremothers, but the previous generations have been through, is really important to show where you've come from. And yes, you said you can shape the decisions and you can change the values set down the line, but you just need to appreciate, I guess, more and respect where it's come from and what it was all set up to do in the first place.
Yeah, one of the people I interviewed in the book was Bill Wrigley, and he had a great quote that I thought was really powerful. Respect the past, but do what's right for the future. Yeah. The trap of the stories is that it creates a world where we can't do anything differently because there's only one way to be successful, right? So if we have a sense of mission and purpose and values, we can apply those in any different way, right? So what we often get into in family business is this dynamic where whenever the next generation comes up with a new idea, it's experienced by the parents' generation as, you don't think I did a good job. This is a criticism of me and how we did things. No, how we did things was how we got to where we are today. It may not be what can get us to the next step. It used to be that one good business idea could last 3 generations. There was an adage that when you start a business, the first generation comes up with a big idea, the second generation operationalizes it, makes it more efficient, and then the third generation either reinvents or dies. But the pace of change in our world today is so fast that we may need 3 good business ideas to last 1 generation. So we need to respect the past and what got us to where we are today, but think about, what do we need to change in order to survive and thrive? We want the inside of our family and our business to be working so well that we can be focused on the outside and the challenges that we're inevitably going to face. Because if we're going to survive for multiple generations, our business has to change and grow. So we want to change our practices, but hold on to our values and our beliefs.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I totally get that. You also mentioned the importance of parenting, and how in parenting, I think you talked about parenting and how kids at a younger age get that sense of purpose, responsibility, and it helps people understand the remits of how they're going to work going forward. Do you think it's going to get harder? We live in a world now where I guess family ties and family bonds are slightly less strong in some cases than they were many generations ago, and families are more disparate around the world. We've got more blended families and more single parents. Do you think that underlying embedding of the family culture in a business could get harder as we make our family lives more complicated?
It is absolutely harder, right? It increases the need for a commitment to talking about these things and working through these things, because we're increasing the complexity of our family, right? the blended families in particular, adopted kids, and some of the complex emotional impacts that can have on the family, we have to talk about those things. And from a parenting perspective, probably the most common thing is that, especially when a business is young in its first or even the second generation, that the business needs more time than the family has. So the children often feel the brunt of that, right? So the parents are so focused on meeting the needs of the business that so there are some stumbles on the family side. I had one next generation member stand up in a family meeting and say, "I deserve more dividends because my dad wasn't there when I was growing up." I had never heard somebody say it so clearly, but articulating that emotional experience of loss, right? I have a sense of loss that my parents weren't there for me in some ways. That doesn't mean they're bad parents, right? Because why are they doing that? They're doing that for the hopefully the benefit of the family long term. But there's a complex emotional challenge that you have to work through in that conversation. But if we can use values to kind of as a unifying force, even it's perhaps even more important in a growingly diverse family, right? Because if it's just a nuclear family that's all grown up together, you all experience the same thing. When you get into the third generation or blended families, you've got kids who have grown up in different environments. I was just on the phone this morning with a family that has 3 kids, each with a different mother. In a family business. So the values are perhaps even more important in finding ways of or places of commonality between the 3 of them that they can commit to together.
And that's an interesting point you make there, because I guess in terms of, it's important to document the values and the rationale behind it, but obviously they'll evolve and update the documentation. It's not, and I get it's not about the documentation. But how important is it then that it is documented in some way? And I love the fact that actually you talked about a family with 7 values where they award a prize every year and they use that to embed the values and share that and create more of a culture. Mm-hmm. But how important is it that in some way, shape or form that those value statements are actually documented somewhere, and even maybe used as part of an induction process to make sure the right people are getting, as you said, getting on the bus?
It's incredibly important. The stories give us the examples of what it means to live these values, right?
Yeah.
Values are great, but if they're not lived, they don't mean a whole lot, right? So values, actually, one of your families that you and I were talking about earlier, Bella Hoare from C. Hoare and Company, said, and she was interviewed in my book as well, but she said, people talk about values as very soft things, but values when lived are actually very hard and edgy, because they make you do things that people will criticize you for. They make you do hard things, right? It wasn't easy for that family to fire the guy who was stealing pie, because they cared about their people a great deal, but they did it because it was the right thing to do.
And I guess that's the difficult thing for many family businesses, is actually to make those difficult decisions, but the value set will help them make an informed decision that is, as you said earlier on, I think the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think accountability is one of the hot button things in a lot of families, because we fear that when the accountability is enacted, that it's going to cause a fissure or a conflict that will end our relationship, right? That's the catastrophic expectation.
Yeah.
So we need to learn how to have these conversations about accountability in a loving and caring way. So, for instance, we have to fire a family member, okay? That's never going to be a completely great conversation, right? There's no way to do that perfectly, but we can do it in a way that is caring and loving, and talks about both the business challenge and the family challenge. So somebody's not performing as a family member, it doesn't seem like you're happy because you're not performing, you're not committed to these things, but we love you and care about you as a family member, and we want you to be happy in what you're doing in your work. How can we help you do that? It's not happening here, right? So it's not just treating it as a business problem of we need to bring the axe down and fire you. It's saying, as a family member, we love and care for you, and you can't be happy with the way you're performing, and the business can't handle it, right? It's not okay, but we love you and we want you to find that place. So help you do that.
Yeah, it's incredibly complex, and we're talking generalities a lot here, I know, and appreciate that. How do you go from, a lot of families will have sat down and they'll say, these are our 5 values and these are our 5 principles, whether it's integrity, honesty, trust. We hear those words all the time, and they're very easy to write on a wall and to stick on the wall and then kind of go back to the day job. How do you take families on that journey so that it's a journey that it becomes real values and real values that are embedded in that business? So they're not just words, that they're actually lived, breathed, and embedded in the culture. Mm-hmm. What steps do you advise in terms of doing that?
Well, I like to take examples and stories from the business where we've struggled, where we've failed, and where we've succeeded. Take different case examples and say, how did the values impact it? So to say, did we live our values in this situation? And how did that impact the outcome? Hopefully, if we're living our values, even when we're failing well, mm-hmm. and we're learning from it, right? But what I often find when you go through and you kind of do what I often talk about, an after action review. So when we've gone through a big change or a big shift, that we go back and we kind of review that and say, how did we do? And what I found is that a lot of times when we struggle or when we fail, it's because we, lost sight of some of our values, or lost sight of our vision of what we were trying to accomplish, or lost sight of our sense of purpose. Yeah. So it's not just, looking at it from a values perspective, but it's saying, is what I'm doing here aligned with our purpose and what we're trying to accomplish? Am I doing it according to the values? And is it going to move us towards our vision? And if you look at struggles and failures as well as successes, you want to make sure it's aligned, and doing that on a regular basis, I think, is important.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You also mentioned that it's not on my watch, which we often hear, and you mentioned the very start of the conversation this afternoon, Andrew, that you never wanted anyone else to feel alone. And we often hear business owners saying it's quite lonely at the top, it's quite lonely trying to hold it all together. Strong values and purpose and all the things you've talked about help businesses succeed for the longer term. You then throw into the mix the pandemic 18 months ago. Have you seen through the work that you do that the businesses that had more deeply embedded values respond better through the course of the pandemic, or has it really, I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, do you think the values have helped businesses deal with the crisis that we've just been through?
The answer is absolutely yes. The families with stronger values had stronger cohesion, which meant that they were more aligned in stress. And this has happened. So now this is my second major economic event in my career. Obviously we had 2008, 2009, the economic downturn then. And, a lot of people would think that people like me would be easy to cut out of the budget in those moments. And the reality is we got busier, because families who were using the economic rewards to cover up the cracks in the armor, to cover up the conflicts and disagreements that they had through dividends or paying out money, when that money dried up, those things came to the surface, right? It goes back to that core piece of the research, which was financial success is necessary but not sufficient, right? Because when the money goes away, what's holding you together? And what was really inspiring during the pandemic to me was that I saw several families where the older generation was a little bit at a loss on how to deal with some of this stuff, because there was technology, there was science and things that they didn't have the energy to, or it's in some respects that they had some fear about going out into the world because they were at risk. And what I saw was the next generation really taking up the mantle and leading in ways that their parents never expected them to do. And so it really was a quantum leap for a lot of next generation members in building their sense of credibility and proving to their parents that they're ready. And, I always say to the next generation is you got to push. Your parents don't typically magically step back and say, here you go, right? There's always this kind of push and pull in this transition process with your parents. But the pandemic really gave an opportunity for the next generation to be problem solvers and to meet the challenge of a really scary and difficult situation.
Mhm. My last question that's come in just before we wrap up in terms of the chat today is, a lot of this happens earlier on in a business journey. So if you had some advice to give to those just starting out on their business, or first possibly transitioning to the second, or just got into the second generation, where would you start in terms of the whole? I mean, they've obviously been successful to get to where they've got to. They've got an entrepreneurial driving it, or an entrepreneur driving their business forward. But those first conversations, those first steps when it comes to setting your values and really making them real and honest and stand the test of time and help the business stand the test of time, what first steps would you advise someone to take? Apart from the book, obviously.
Well, my brothers haven't read the book, so don't feel too bad. The funny thing is that you really, well, it's not really funny, but the answer to your question is really, you have to start with, why do we want to be in business together? And if you can have an honest conversation about what inspires you about being a part of your family business, certainly the financial rewards should be a part of it, and they're necessary, but it's not enough, right? So if we can have an honest conversation about what are we passionate about, and how does that really connect with why we want to be in business together and what it means for our relationships. We often have the measures of success as a business. We've got profit, loss, return on investment, return on assets. We got all of those measures. We've got operational measures of efficiency. But have we talked about, what does it mean to be a successful family? If we were to look 20 years into the future, how would we know we were a successful family? And we spent all of our time talking about what it means to be a successful business. And we really overlook this question of, what does it mean to be a successful family? We just kind of think that our family is supposed to operate and be okay. The level of complexity and diversity that is part of being a family business, you need to be intentional about, what does it mean to be a successful family? And then you have to put the time, money, and effort into creating that family, right? If you leave it to the wind, it will become what it will become. But we want to be intentional about, what's the family we're trying to create? And if we want to be strong, loving, connected, caring, we have to make that commitment every day. We have to spend the time to build those relationships every day.
Yeah, totally. Because you have to work on the family as well as work on the business, and it's all too easy, isn't it, just to focus on the business and actually to turn the volume down on the bit that really matters. It's why you're in business together in the first place.
Yep.
Andrew, as always, it's enlightening to listen to you talk. I think there's some real nuggets of information there that I think family business owners can go away, whether they're a first generation or a 21st generation family business, and learn and listen and apply. So again, thank you so much for your honesty, the insights, and actually good luck on your journey. You've come a long way, I guess, since the farm. Is the farm still in operation, by the way?
So we actually, over the period of about 15 years, developed the land around the house. So the house still exists. It's a state historical site. If anybody ever wants to go to Piqua, Ohio, you can go to the Johnston Farm in Piqua, Ohio. It's a state historical site because it was the center of trading with the Native Americans when the settlers were coming across the U.S. But the land that we owned, which was the farm around it, we developed for a variety of different purposes over 15 years. And so my brothers and I have redeployed that capital into a variety of businesses, including we're investors in 2 whiskey companies. And so we get to enjoy the fruits of that labor.
Well, it's a beautiful house, and it's where the story for you started. I'm delighted the house is still standing and it's still part of the story that you tell today. So, Andrew, thank you so much for today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Andrew, can you now just